So good afternoon, everyone. We're going to kick this off. My name is Will Marm. I'm a 20-year Special Forces veteran. I'm a recent graduate of the Veteran Training Program from Bancroft Capital. I'm currently working on the capital markets desk. Welcome to this iteration of our Patriot Lunch. I put together this Patriot Lunch quarterly series because I wanted to highlight one high-performing military veteran to a broad spectrum of corporate America. It's my intent through this Patriot Lunch to break down those barriers and for everyone to gain perspective and an appreciation of the unique skill sets that veterans bring to the nation. When I was transitioning out of the military and I'd go to, job fairs or just do anything to try to figure out what life looked like after the Army, it was 1,000 of me and like 3 corporations. My intent is to try to flip that equation on its head and highlight one star performer today, that's Travis, to a lot of corporate leadership and organizations. So the value proposition I want you to think through is twofold. First, Bancroft Capital provides you a venue for Travis, this veteran, to engage in dialogue with, to ask questions, to learn about. And second, it's a venue for Travis to share his perspectives and experiences as he transitions into corporate America, for him to learn about your journey, to build those networks, strengthen out his network, and forge his own path. So we succeed when those relationships are made, strengthened, and you gain a better understanding of the sacrifices that he's made and that the military lifestyle demands. I'd like to hand it over to Cal Quinn, the CEO of Bancroft Capital, for his opening remarks. Please go ahead, Cal.
Well, first, thank you all so much for taking the time out of your day to spend some time with us. And not only your consideration of veterans, but your consideration of Bancroft Capital. We truly appreciate that consideration. We know how busy your lives are, especially with all the volatility and what's happening in the markets today. Bancroft Capital is a service-disabled, veteran-owned and operated broker-dealer and investment bank, operating 5 business units: fixed income sales and trading, equity trading, cash management, capital markets, and public finance. We are blessed to have about 30 professionals operating 5 offices through our country. And our firm, more importantly, is founded on the backs of people, some of whom are sitting around the table today, others participating remotely in this Zoom session, who have come alongside and embraced the initiative of providing meaningful training and employment to disabled veterans. Our objective is not jobs for veterans, but restoration. Restoration of veterans and disabled veterans in particular to the rightful place of leadership in society and community, but first and foremost as providers to their own family. We use the prosperity of our for-profit business to sustain a veteran training program that helps us to facilitate that. But at the very heart of what we do and the ethos of our organization is a commitment to support veterans in every way that we can in their transition into civilian careers. And that's only possible with civilian counterparts who are willing to give us the opportunity. So we thank you for that. We thank you for that consideration, not just for our organization, but for any and every veteran who put their lives on the line to serve our country, to serve all of us, right? What we do as an organization, to a very large extent, is trying to populate the experiential database of our civilian counterparties with a reference point where they realize the value to their organization of including veterans and disabled veterans into their fold. And so this Patriot Lunch helps us to do that. As has already been articulated by Will, we want to introduce to you the value and the skill sets of the veteran community. Give you the opportunity to ask questions and interface so that you can better discern the value they can deliver to your top line and your bottom line within your organization. That's how we perpetuate this. So thank you so much for your participation. I'm going to get out of the way and keep my mouth shut from here on because I'd love to learn from Travis and hear the dialogue as Will and Travis exchange. Will?
Thanks, Cal. Quick shout out to Constellation Brands. They're compliments of our partners from Constellation Brands. They've donated a door prize. They've donated a special bottle of a double rye whiskey. Constellation Brands is the leading beer, wine, spirits company in North America, and they're keenly focused on veterans issues. So should your registration number be pulled out of our virtual magic hat, you're going to be the lucky winner, and we'll contact you for an address and deliver this door prize to your front door. Let me see if I can share the screen. This is the door prize right there. And it is a double rye, very spicy rye whiskey. If you don't want it, we can pass it on to the number 2 guy. So stop share is going on. Okay, we're back in. That worked flawlessly. Well done. So rules of the road briefly. Videos off, mics are muted. This is a free, no threat, no hassle environment. I encourage dialogue. So if you have any questions or comments, just raise your Zoom hand, type it in, or you could talk it in. We'll get you in the queue. Kinner's going to be managing that. Kinner is a West Point grad. He's a veteran and a graduate of our training program as well. So without further ado, Travis, we're pleased to welcome U.S. Air Force Lieutenant Colonel retired Travis Clovis. Travis comes to us in partnership with the Special Operators Transition Foundation, SOTF.org, of which I am an alum as well. Travis is an Air Force veteran with 20+ years experience leading large, diverse organizations globally. He possesses broad experience planning, leading complex, high-risk operations. He's a graduate of the United States Air Force Academy. He holds 2 master's degrees, one from the University of Arizona and the other the Air University. He's an experienced special operations aviator qualified in the MH-53 payload helicopter and the CV-22 tilt rotor platforms, and he supported numerous combat humanitarian missions. He's a distinguished graduate of the United States Air Force Weapons School, Top Gun. Personally, I'm very grateful for his piloting ability because he and I flew around a few times in Europe, probably even the Middle East. But pass it on to Travis. We're really grateful for you to be here. Excited for this time to dialogue, interact. Kick it off with a personal introduction, please, brother. Tell us what you're all about, buddy. Go ahead.
Awesome. Thank you, Will. Thank you, Cal, for hosting and having me. I really appreciate the opportunity. Like Will said, I really want to, I'll talk a little bit about myself. I'm a pilot, so, I can't help but doing that. But I really want to kind of talk more about the larger picture of how veterans bring value to commercial organizations. Like Will said, and something I just figured out that I had in common with Cal, I'm an Air Force brat. I grew up in the Air Force. My dad was an Air Force Academy grad. He was a pilot. I went to the United States Air Force Academy. I went to grad school for a year, and then I started my aviation journey. I ended up in special operations helicopters. I spent the early formative part of my career in the Middle East, Afghanistan, and Iraq, crossing paths with guys like Will and his teammates. And then in the middle of my career, I transitioned to the CV-22 tilt rotor. I served as a schoolhouse instructor, teaching new pilots how to fly that platform. I went off and did some mid-career stuff. I had the opportunity to command a very diverse organization, running an airfield, doing weather forecasting, packing parachutes, survival training, sort of all the cats and dogs that make flying organizations able to do their missions. And then I went off to the Pentagon. I was lucky enough to work on the OSD staff, the Office of the Secretary of Defense staff, as a subject matter expert on humanitarian affairs and disaster response. And then I finished out my career at Air Force Special Operations Headquarters, where I was in charge of the operational training. And then my last role was as the sort of a thought partner, the Commander's Action Group Director for the commander of Air Force Special Operations Command. I retired in 2019. I did some independent consulting, and I currently work for a small tech firm in Austin, Texas, which that's an interesting part of the story if anyone wants to ask about that. But I really don't want to spend a lot of time telling you sort of the history of time. I'd rather answer questions, have a dialogue. I know that we have a limited amount of time, and so I think there's a lot to talk about, and I'm sure folks have questions. So Will, I'll turn it over to you.
Travis, thanks. I got one here lined up, but first off, for the audience, those folks who I've likely never heard of a Commander's Action Group or a Commander's Initiative Group. That's like a kind of a thought cell of folks that answer and run down very complicated problems for the boss. And the boss is going to be a 2, 3, 4-star general, and they put together a whole lot of lines of thought, and they've got networks and communications into people who can provide answers. It's really fascinating. So that I hope somebody asks you a question about that.
Sure. Yeah.
But so like easier ones that's a little less thoughtful is so Air Force Academy grad. Most grads go to the Air Force Academy to get into the sky on planes, fixed-wing planes, like fighter jets, the pointy-nosed jets that go really fast, or the cargo jets, the dull, round-nosed planes that go slow and just carry things, or some of the selective like cyber or space jobs. Why did you choose a career in the special operations career field, and how is that unique in the Air Force?
Yeah, it's a good question. It is unique. It's special operations across the entire Department of Defense is very small. Even though they get a lot of, particularly in the last 20 years, there's a lot of focus on special operations. It's a very, very small community across all of the Department of Defense, and the Air Force is no different, particularly on the aviation side. My history was, my dad was a Air Force Academy grad. He was a fighter pilot. I had notions of, kind of going into the family business. I didn't actually know that I wanted to fly when I started at the Air Force Academy. And I was able to get a couple of opportunities while I was there, and I kind of caught the bug. And that sort of triggered it. But I always wanted to be a tactical aviator. I thought, I want to fly low and fast, and I want to, do these things. And so, I pursued fighter aviation, but, I also looked at special operations aviation. It's a weird thing to kind of make somebody want to go into this, but when I was a senior in high school was when the Battle of Mogadishu happened. And I remember that. And I remember, hearing about the Night Stalkers, and I remember hearing about what the Rangers and some of the other units that were there did. And I just, for whatever reason, I said, hey, I want to be associated with something like that. I want to be a part of that type of formation. As a cadet, I went out to Korea as one of our summer programs. I actually got to fly in the back of a Pablo. And I'm like, oh, this is really neat. This is everything that I kind of want it to be, flying around at treetop level and landing on rooftops and that sort of stuff. And then really the last thing was there's this book, and Will's probably of the right generation. Maybe some of the sort of more seasoned folks might remember the book. There was a book called Commandos by Douglas Waller. He was a Newsweek reporter, and it had chapters on the Navy SEALs and Special Forces, specifically like Robin Sage, their graduation exercise. And there was a chapter about the Pablo and Air Force Special Operations. And so all these things sort of came together, and you have to make a choice, and you have a tiered preference sheet when you go through pilot training. And when you get about halfway through the program, everybody tracks off. And so I tracked to helicopters, and that was kind of what started me on that journey into special operations.
That's great. And for the audience, tactical and strategic, and Travis, you correct me if I'm wrong, is that basically altitude, right? So strategic could, and the weapons they carry, right? So, and what their missions are. So tactical, guys, you're supporting that tactical fire of the ground. So when you and I were flying together, well, you were flying me and doing your mission, and I was, there in Machrihanish, Scotland, 2005, 2006 timeframe. You were supporting the tactical fight, whereas bomber, like a B-52 team plane crew, is strategic. Am I hitting that right?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the way that I would differentiate that is I think, and it's not meant to denigrate, but like when I think of our tanker aircraft, they're there to refuel fighter jets and bombers. We have our airlifters that are, they're kind of like the UPS planes. And they do tactical activities, like they do airdrop of paratroopers and some of those things. But generally, they're going to climb up to altitude. They're going to fly on an airway. They're going to land at an airport. It's a critical role. There's a lot of specialization that goes into it. Again, it's not a better than or worse than. It's just, what I wanted to be focused on was I wanted to be very closely integrated with ground forces. That's what I would call tactical. And so, I always used to say that, on sort of down days, I would be like, well, I'm just a bus driver for these guys. On slightly better days, I would be like, well, I'm like the getaway driver. These guys are going to go do the bank job, and I'm there to make sure that everybody gets away at the end. And there's a lot that goes into that. And so that's really what my focus was. Is I was just so impressed with just the special operations community and the special operations teams that I've been exposed to, that I wanted to be a small part of that. And quite frankly, I'm not a lift a log over my head and march with a backpack for 40 miles. And so I figured it's a little bit better to be up in the air and do that piece of it.
Yeah. So 99% of my career, I envied
Yeah.
that. Great. So listen, your career, it's remarkable. It's spanned many years of intensive combat operations and deployments around the world. Which particular operation or event or activity or engagement, even conversation, would you consider the most memorable?
That's a tough one, because there are a lot of them, and most memorable could mean scariest. Most memorable could mean sort of most meaningful as well. I was lucky, I think, in a way. I was able to go to Afghanistan early in my career. I was still a lieutenant when I did my first deployment to Afghanistan. And Afghanistan is one of the toughest aviation environments in the world. It's very, very high altitude. It's very, very tall mountains, dust storms, high temperatures. It's a very unforgiving environment, particularly for helicopters. And so, I think getting that out of my system early was an important part of my kind of professional development as a pilot. And I have a lot of memories there. I was also part of the initial invasion of Iraq in 2003. And so for folks that are familiar with how that went, the initial activities that actually happened were, there was a special operations element that attacked Iraq from the west. That was primarily an Army-based element with the 160th SOAR. And then my group, we were in the south, based out of Kuwait, and we ended up taking some of Will's teammates, fifth group, 5th Special Forces group, up into the southern part of Iraq to basically precede the Army and Marine units that were going to drive up the highway to Baghdad. And so I literally flew on the first night of the war. It was very, very challenging. It was a long night. It was 14 hours in the helicopter and about 10 hours of blade time. And there was a lot there. Those kind of stand out. The one that really, I think I'm particularly proud of was a little bit later in my career. I had the opportunity to lead some of these formations, and I got the chance to lead a formation that had 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment, again, the Army Special Operations helicopters, and some Navy Special Operations helicopters. And it was this particular mission was 11 aircraft hitting multiple targets all at the same time. And it was a foreign fighter training facility in Iraq. And in particular, our target was a surface-to-air missile training facility. So, shoulder-fired man pads that people were using to shoot down passenger jets and other helicopters. And that was our target. And there was a little part of me like, oh, so we're going to send some helicopters to take out some guys that like to shoot down helicopters. But once I got past sort of that part of it, it was kind of a proud moment of mine. I kind of felt like I had hit a certain a standard that I'd held for myself professionally, and I was able to bring this diverse element together and get this mission accomplished. So those are things that I sort of remember.
Yeah, those are great stories and great memories. The ones that you remember, right? Because we've been through a lot. Later, let's talk about on our own. You and I talk about the invasion of Iraq. I was in the 3rd Infantry Division and did the thunder runs there before I went Special Forces, and so I recognize their support there in the southern part of Iraq and Kuwait distinctly. And your point about the surface to air missile sites or training facilities there. I think the takeaway on that I'd say is once you can just mentally get past the insanity of doing what you're about to do, and the importance of what you're doing overrides that insanity, that's when you are, that's kind of I think maybe the hallmark of one of the memorable moments. And I can see that corollary with what you just mentioned. Very good. So, talking now from your education to your experiences in the uniform, now we're transitioning out. Okay, you've been out about the same time as me, and we're sniffing around and looking, and we're in this giant world called America and corporate America, and but given the specialized nature of your work over the span of your career, Travis, how did you approach the transition from active duty to the civilian world? What lessons did you learn and apply in that process that maybe you could share with some others that are going to watch this recording or that are dialed in now?
Yeah, I think first, just a caveat for everybody is my transition journey is probably more of an object lesson in what not to do than how to be most successful. I think it's sort of worked out through sheer persistence, but I definitely have some lessons learned, and I'll kind of hit those. The first, and it's the most important, but I don't want to spend too much time on it because I'm not sure it's totally relevant to this audience, but I think you'll identify with it, Will, is there's a huge emotional piece. They call it transition for a reason, and there's a huge emotional piece of leaving the military, particularly if you're a career soldier, airman, whatever it is that you did. If you spent 20 years, now you're going to get that paycheck and you're going to be officially retired, then, there is there's an emotional piece of that, of hanging up the uniform and sort of putting that away on a shelf. That's challenging. I think some of that contributed to the first lesson, which is I think veterans need to know to start early. You should be thinking about you're going to eventually leave the service. Even if you become the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the top ranking military officer, eventually General Milley will have to retire and he will have to do something after this. So starting early and thinking about life after the military and thinking about what is it that I want to do? What are roles that are interesting to me? What are my particular skill sets? What are the things that drive me? Do I like working in teams? Do I like being an individual contributor? Do I want to be a leader in a company, or do I just want to be a subject matter expert and responsible for myself? Those are all things that people need to work through in order to be able to narrow down their focus. Because there are millions of jobs out there, and not every job is suitable for every person. And so, it's almost like the tyranny of choice. So starting early and really starting to frame out some of those things and doing some of that internal self-examination, I think is very important. I probably delayed it again because I didn't want to deal with I'm going to hang up the uniform and give away something that I felt like was integral to my character for so long. And so I probably procrastinated a little bit. The next one is, I think, networking. And I think this event is a perfect example of what veterans should pursue is networking. Part of figuring out what you want to be when you grow up is figuring out what you don't want to be when you grow up. And it's also understanding what exactly are the opportunities that are out there, and how do I translate my story into a language, into a different frame of reference that is understandable. Because again, and Will's already corrected me, we talked about it yesterday, and he's already corrected me twice, is, we have a lingo, we have a, just shorthand that we've grown up with, and it becomes second nature. And so sometimes when you're talking to someone, you throw something out and you expect that they understand it because everybody else that you've dealt with for the past 20 years has understood exactly what that means. And so learning that, and part of it is socialization, right? Is networking. It's figuring out, I like this company, let me understand more about their culture, let me understand more about how they operate, let me do that. It's also just meeting other folks that could point you in a direction that you hadn't thought about. And so I think networking is a little bit of self-education, and it's also a little bit of shots on goal. And sometimes, my current role was purely the benefit of networking. And I could talk about that a little bit. The last one is ask for help. I'm not what I would call a super proactive. There are a lot of people that are very, very proactive. You find them on LinkedIn. They work with veterans transition groups. They do that. I'm not quite that way. That's a personality thing for me. I recognize sort of what my strong suit and weaknesses are. And I'm not going to be part of I'm going to help every veteran transition. It's just not kind of how I'm built. But I do help veterans transition. I spend a lot of time talking with veterans, particularly in the SOF community, because I feel like I have a common frame of reference with them. And I always tell them that transition is a team sport. And so, the group that Will talked about earlier, the Special Operators Transition Foundation, that was part of my network, talking with other people that weren't part of SOTIF, but were related to the special operations community, was really helpful. And I found that people were very giving of their time. And so I try to be giving of my time as well. But I think that for a lot of veterans, they're so used to never show weakness, never ask for help. You're expected to know. And if you don't know, figure it out. And I think that's a bad lesson that we learn from our time in the military that doesn't help us in transition. And so again, that's why having the opportunity to kind of engage with business leaders and those sort of things is you may find that veterans aren't going to ask for help. And so sometimes extending that hand to them, it can go a long way, because they may not know that they need help. And it's only until they're foundering that they kind of go, oh, okay, I can't do this on my own. So I think that those are, there's a lot of, what I would call practical, tactical tips for transition, but I think just big picture philosophy, those are the things that I think I would highlight.
Yeah, those are great, Travis. I took a ton of notes there. Internal self-exam. I like self-examination. I like your shots on goal. That's important, especially after my team lost last night. We got a question. Well, before I say that, also my first resume. We did this like dry run rehearsal. To give the resume to the person, and she gives me like a fake interview. She said to me, "Oh my goodness, what do I do with this? This is a great resume, but it's scary." I was like, "What do you mean it's scary? It's not scary." So it is a process, to say the least. And that language translation is like it's never ending. So we have a question from the audience from Will Connolly. He's mentoring an officer from the Navy to the civilian transition. What would he do as a mentor to do more to help those in the first few months of starting a transition, which is like what are the first few months, what are the biggest hurdles in the first few months that he can try to focus his mentor on?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. And I'm gonna make some assumptions, because obviously I don't know the specifics. But I think in general, the problem that most veterans have, and the question that you have to answer first, and they're kind of very closely related, is figuring out what you want to be when you grow up. And that it's a tough, it's probably the hardest thing that someone can do. And if you don't do it, you're going to struggle, because you're basically just going to bounce from opportunity to opportunity and go, yeah, I guess I could do that, or yeah, this is it. And I'm not talking about, there are a lot of folks that are like, you got to find your passion. And I'll be honest with you, at least for me, it's easier said than done. It makes for a great, book title, Find Your Passion, and it briefs well, but it's a little sort of pop psychology to me. I think the more tangible things are, again, helping this officer, sort of understand how do you break down this job search problem. And I'll just go real quickly through the sort of rubric that I use. And I think it's probably similar. You're sort of trying to, it's a multivariate problem. And what you're trying to do is you're trying to lock in variables and then eventually solve for and optimize for the remaining ones that you haven't locked in. So typically it's location, where do you want to live after you retire? It's what are your compensation requirements or desires? And then it's, a combination of what industry do you want to work in, what company do you want to work for, and what role do you want to serve? And so if you can either eliminate them or lock them in, then you get down to, okay, I know that I want to live in the North Carolina area and my compensation is flexible and these are companies that are interesting. Okay, then that's what you should target. And so I think that helping solve some of those problems, and then the next layer deep is, what types of activities energize you. It's not what do you like to do, it's what energizes you. What takes away energy. Do you want to work on a team? Do you want to be an individual contributor? Some of those things will help kind of define what is going to be in the realm of the acceptable from a job perspective. And then once you've sort of narrowed that down, then you can go and actually do what I would call the practical job search, which is, going and researching, this is the town that I want to live in, and these are the businesses that are there, and let me start networking and figuring out who works in those companies. But I think early on, helping educate, even just like going through corporate structure and going, this is what the CEO does, this is what the COO does, helping translate differences between what the military would consider operations and what a business might consider operations are different. A lot of what the military would consider operations, businesses might consider logistics. A lot of what businesses would consider operations, the military might consider admin. And so, making some of those translations and helping someone understand kind of, okay, this is how the business world works, will help inform that what do I want to be when I grow up question. And I think that, again, it's hard to do. And it's very personal, but it's kind of important that you get that right, because then the rest of it, you could be vectoring somebody in the wrong direction if they don't know, or they don't have a good idea of kind of, or they're not being truthful, if that makes sense.
Good. Great answer, Travis. Next question here. It's a little more kind of broad. Afghanistan, talking through. What is, when you said the aviation environment in Afghanistan is pretty challenging, tell us why. Tell us what goes through, and maybe how those lessons were learned or avoided. Go ahead.
Yeah. So I will spare everybody a class in rotary wing aerodynamics, but suffice it to say, particularly for helicopters, generally higher altitude is worse performance, higher temperature is worse performance, and so you have a lot of high temperature. And the floor of Afghanistan, the southern part of the country, sits at about 3,000 feet above sea level. When you get into the northern part of the country, the valleys are at 10 to 11 to 12,000 feet above sea level. And the mountains, are 14, 16, 1,000 feet tall. And so if you're in a jet aircraft, you fly around at 25,000 feet. You can go anywhere in the country, no problem. If you're in a helicopter, most tactical helicopters in the military, their service ceilings are, depending on the weight, they're in the 10 to 12,000 foot range. And so, getting through mountain passes during certain parts of the year can be challenging. The other part is just the weather. You get sandstorms. They used to have the basically the 100 days of dust in the southern part of the country. So when I was there, I was in Kandahar, which is sort of, heart of the Taliban country. And literally, like, it started in, the April timeframe, and it was just dust storms with, about a, half a mile visibility every day for 3 months. And you're like, okay, this is really challenging. Up in the northern part, up in the mountains, particularly getting out of what's called the Bagram Bowl. So Bagram, our main sort of operating hub, sits in this giant bowl. Think like Jackson Hole, Wyoming. It's a little bit bigger. And so to be able to climb out and go through these mountain passes during the winter, a lot of times you couldn't do it because the clouds were down below, touching the floor of the valley. So it was a very, very challenging. And then, trying to go and land on mountaintops and land on these small peaks and that sort of stuff. Just really gnarly, like advanced or varsity type of flying environment.
Tough. And then from the ground guy's point of view, the things are so high, the mountains are so high. When you're flying, the planes, helicopters, anything flying are literally getting shot at from above,
right.
Which is terrible because it's not like you're going to fly up above away from them. It's not the way you normally think of it. I mean, they're coming at you from all distance. And I remember an operation in Iraq that wanted us to get in and take, hit an enemy encampment. And even if we wanted to do that, which is a big if, like, we'd have to find a flight crew that was crazy enough to fly in there, because you're flying in through miles of mountain passes with bad guys shooting at you from the top, the bottom, the left, the right, front, rear, the whole time in, and then, oh, by the way, out. And that was crazy. Like, these people can just stay there. They're not even going anywhere because they can't get anywhere because they can't even fly in. It was nuts, though. I'm sure you saw thousands of good ideas like that. Travis, we have time for maybe one or more. They're starting to flow in now. Kenner or Jimmy, did you have a question there? And for watching, go ahead.
Travis, thank you so much for your wisdom. I think one of the things you've said that I've never heard before, and I think it's important to kind of resonate again, because it touches me and I see it in so many veterans, is we are taught not to ask for help, just to find a way, right, and overcome, right? And it's such a great point that you mentioned, Travis, that maybe the best way that our well-meaning civilian counterparties can help us is by offering help, forcing us into that dialogue, because we won't willingly go there. Sometimes we'll resist it tooth and nail. So many of the participants in our call right now are just that, well-meaning civilian counterparts who are passionate about helping veterans, but sometimes just don't know how. And a lot of that is translating the civilian or the military skill set into a civilian job vertical, right? Whether it's sector or whether it's a particular job title, right? I wonder, can you take maybe a minute or two and provide some anecdotes, some thoughts as it relates to job types, individual kind of career paths in the military, just skill sets that you would suggest become very translational to successful civilian careers?
Yeah, no, that's a great question, and I guess what I'll lead with is I think that the skills are more translatable than we typically acknowledge on either side of the equation. I've sat in an office and I had to put, like Office Space, I had to put the cover sheet on the TPS report. Like I've done all that stuff. I know how to use Microsoft Office and all of those sort of tools, and I've dealt with bureaucracy. I actually had a point written down that I think especially more senior veterans, they're actually very savvy in sort of organizational design, because the military is not monolithic in terms of how it organizes. There are, particularly like in tactical, what I would call combat oriented units, they're very task organized, meaning that they have all of the organic innate capabilities, and so that would be what's called like a cross-functional team in the commercial world. And in others, you get a very functional, type of organization. And then you have matrixed organizations in the military. So veterans have seen all of these things. They recognize it when they get there. They just may not know what you call it, and you may not know what they call it. I think the other, so, where veterans, and I'll focus on soft, but I think it applies to a larger group as well. There are folks, specialists in the military across all services, where their skill sets translate directly into civilian employment. If you are an engineer, you work on a Navy ship on a nuclear reactor, you can go do a systems engineering job. You can be a power plant person. You can work in the energy industry. Those things apply. If you're a cyber specialist, you can absolutely, in fact, those people are getting snatched up left and right from the military to go work in the private sector because of the skill sets that they have. So you can work in cyber. If you're an IT person, you can absolutely go and do company IT. It's all the same. In fact, we use a lot of off-the-shelf commercial products in the military. And so people have those skill sets. Where the translation starts to break down a little bit, so think, medics, think, any sort of specialist, they can go into their specialist career field. Where the translation breaks down, unfortunately, is for a little bit for folks like me, particularly, I don't want to fly for the airlines. I didn't have a desire to be a professional pilot in my second life. And so I spent a not insignificant amount of my time developing a skill set that I'm going to put on the shelf and put away. For guys like Will, there's no equivalent for an 18 Alpha, so a special forces person. There's no equivalent for an infantryman outside of private security firms. But it doesn't mean that there aren't translatable skills. They have small team leadership, they have large team leadership, they have organizational design, they have normal office type of skills. And oh, by the way, particularly in the special operations side, you don't get there by being strong like bull. Like, that's a part of it, but you would be amazed at how intellectual most of these people are, and they are masters at learning. And so, picking up what I would call just basic office stuff, I think most people coming out are going to have those skill sets. It's where do you fit them into your organization, and where can they provide value? And some of that could be in, corporate strategy. Some of that could be in operations. Some of that could be in logistics. Some of it could be in marketing. People have dealt with things like psychological operations and information warfare and messaging. That's what marketing is. We just call it different things. So I know that we had a limited amount of time, so that's a very quick shorthand of how those skills translate. Hopefully that's helpful.
Travis, yes, it did, and thank you for that. We're getting we've chummed the waters, and we have a lot of people writing in questions, but we're running out of time. So what we're going to do is wrap it up. I'll send out a quick chat on this chat thing here and say thank you, everybody. Great questions, great dialogue, and I'll send out a note, and I'll have Travis's information on it. It's travis.j.clovis@gmail.com, as well as Travis Clovis on LinkedIn. My email address, you're going to get an email from me, but it's in my screen name, Bancroftforvets.com, sorry. and so friends of the audience, the Hope This Patriot Lunch has afforded you an opportunity to enjoy a small group dialogue with Travis, a premier star that's now in the corporate workforce. He has freely chosen to fight for and defend our way of life. And for that, Travis, thank you very much to the sacrifice, to your family, to you and your family, for the sacrifices you made.
Awesome. Thanks. Can I throw just a last plug? Just can I get the last word?
Plug it. Let's go.
So thank you, Will, for sort of emceeing today. Cal, thank you to you and the Bancroft team for sort of hosting this event in general. I think it's an awesome idea. I'm excited to dial into future ones and kind of hear what other folks have to say. Kenner, thanks for sort of running the show in the background as well. I did want to put a plug out for Special Operators Transition Foundation. That's, if anyone's interested in a tangible way to help SOF veterans, it's a great organization. I can't speak highly enough about them. Again, Will and I are both alum from the organization. They're doing great things. They're constantly improving their program. They can put you in touch with the most talented people in the world, and help bring them into your team. And I really think that if I had to pick one, I'm a little bit biased, but I think that it's a great way, initial step to help contribute more if that's what you're interested in.
Absolutely. Thanks, Travis. Yeah, great plug there for SOTF, SOTF.org. I put the link there. We've coordinated with some of our partners who are interested and are just building them into the pipeline of the information seminars with the SOTF fellows. Okay, so team out there, the virtual team, thank you for your time and attention. We'll send out an email shortly for the next Patriot lunch. It's going to be Thursday, August, August 11th. Feel free to forward that invite out to your company, to your network. Share the good news of this event, this program, of these accomplished veterans who are going to enter your workforce. There will be one lucky virtual registrant who is going to get a delicious bottle of goodness, and Jimmy will let me know that hopefully right after this. And have a great rest of the week. Great day, great rest of the week, and see you guys in August. Thanks, guys.